credentials. And this is an information item. This item is being presented by Terry Clark and Phyllis Jacobson. Ms. Clark, will you begin, please?
Good morning, Commissioners. So this item opens up a new topic for your consideration. And I want to assure you that this topic, assessing a candidate's subject matter or content knowledge prior to earning the preliminary teaching credential, it's going to take some time to explain it and for you to consider what the next step should be. This is not something we're going to finish up today. So a bit of history. Back in December of 2014, you had an advisory group convened. There were actually 7 subgroups within that advisory group, and a lot of review and updates to things related to teacher preparation have taken place. The preliminary teacher preparation program standards were updated and adopted. The teaching performance expectations have been updated. The design standards for performance assessments and consequently the performance assessments have been redeveloped. There was a review of your accreditation system, and that was strengthened and streamlined. And so a lot has taken place. An area we really haven't done a lot of conversation yet is about subject matter preparation of educators. So on the monitor, you're seeing the graphic from Appendix A. And so if you want to see it larger, it's in your item under Appendix A. This is an updated Learning to Teach system graphic. And we've had a Learning to Teach system graphic for over 10 years, and we pulled it out and said, oh, we need to do a little bit of updating. So updating was done pretty quickly. I just want to walk us through the graphic in general to set the context. So the very left-hand column area of the graphic is all about subject matter preparation. And you'll see there that a bachelor's degree is required for a person to be able to get a credential. And that during that bachelor's degree, the preparation is when they are understanding and learning about the content knowledge they will eventually teach. Then there are some options in the box that we'll talk about as we go through the presentation today. The second box over to the right, from the left in, is the preliminary teacher preparation. And you'll see that in preliminary teacher preparation, there are 4 delivery models identified. The integrated undergraduate that Executive Director Sandy gave an update on this morning, the post-baccalaureate or traditional student teaching-based program, a residency program, which is a more of a specialized student teaching program, and the intern program. To the right of, and then you see this large bar that says, preliminary credential. The person has now earned a preliminary credential. To the right of the preliminary credential box, you'll see the what the person has to do to earn a clear teaching credential. All teachers complete an induction program to earn the clear teaching credential. Induction is a single experience now for teachers, and that's how they earn their clear teaching credential. And then past that second credential bar is the credential renewal. And at this point in time, California does not have a state requirement for professional growth for a teacher to renew their credential. Instead, that professional development responsibility is left to the local level. You also on the left-hand side see a dotted box about the Classified Teacher Training Program. That's one of the grant programs that the state entrusted the commission to get up and going. And we've got a number of programs across the state where in an LEA, a classified employee gets financial support to finish their college degree and to earn their teaching credential. We wanted to provide you this graphic kind of to have a touchstone as we're talking. What we're talking about today in this item is really that very first box. There are 2 options up in the box talk about passing the examination, which we conversationally call the CSET exam, and or completing a commission-approved subject matter program. In today's consent item, you actually approved 2 new subject matter programs, or SMPPs, as we write about in the item, both at the University of California, Santa Barbara, a mathematics and a foundational level mathematics program. And that brings us up to 235 different subject matter programs. You'll find that in, I think it's Appendix C of the item. If we could now turn to Appendix D in the item, that is some section from Education Code, the very last page, and it identifies for you the allowable credential areas. It's kind of weird to think, but the commission actually does not have authority to develop a credential in whatever area you want. The legislature gives the commission the authority to develop credentials, and the credentials that the commission is required to have and to implement are the elementary credential, which we call multiple subject in California, and that's for self-contained teachers, and then single subject credentials in the 15 credential areas that are identified there in that second section of the Ed Code. You'll notice theater and dance are the two newest ones. The state board is considering the theater and dance content standards, and as those are finished, we will then be bringing them into the credential world. We'll have to develop the requirements for the subject matter understanding for those, and then the pedagogical requirements based on the framework language for what a teacher needs to know and be able to do with that content knowledge. I also need to point out down lower in the 44257.2 section, if you look at paragraph C, you'll see that the legislature also has expressly stated that within science, there are 4 specific science areas that must also be offered: biology, chemistry, geosciences, and physics. And with the allowance of what we can do, we also have a foundational level general science credential as well as a foundational level mathematics credential. And those are credentials for people that don't have quite all the content for the full credential in those fields, mainly for people to teach in the middle schools in those content areas. So this is kind of just setting you up. What are the credentials we're talking about? Which part of the preparation system are we talking about? This is kind of my long introduction to the item. And so now Dr. Jacobson's going to take over and explain how California currently assesses a candidate's subject matter knowledge and the laws that are related to that. Then later in part 2, we'll ask you about some questions and for a discussion for you to have.
Thank you, Terry, and good morning, Commissioners. So California's subject matter requirement is based in several education codes, and we've provided citations for you in the item for those codes. The purpose of this statutory requirement is to assure that candidates for a multiple subject, single subject, and education specialist credential are knowledgeable in the content that they will be teaching to the K-12 public school students. Now, statute makes a distinction between demonstrating subject matter knowledge, which refers to the knowledge of a specific content of a given subject area, and demonstrating pedagogical content knowledge, which refers to how to teach that particular content appropriately to students, and also includes a wide range of planning and related instructional skills. This distinction has been the subject of some debate and differing viewpoints over the years. But where it landed in 1976, following the Ryan Act of 1970, is still this distinction being maintained in current statute. Another important distinction is that subject matter preparation typically occurs in California at the undergraduate level within coursework typically offered in the arts and sciences divisions, whereas teacher preparation typically occurs at the graduate level and in coursework typically offered in the education division or department. The one exception, of course, is the integrated undergraduate teacher preparation option, where subject matter preparation and pedagogical preparation occur in the same program. As Terry mentioned, there are 2 statutory routes for candidates to meet the subject matter requirement: pass the commission-approved subject matter examination in the content of that credential, otherwise known, as Terry mentioned, the CSET, which actually stands for California Subject Examinations for Teachers, in case you were wondering, or complete a commission-approved subject matter program in the content of the credential. Statute specifies that the purpose of the examination is to, quote, measure achievement and knowledge solely of objective knowledge of subject matter. So this is why the CSET examination series focuses only on content knowledge and does not include pedagogical content knowledge. With regard to the subject matter programs, these programs prepare candidates in the same content as is covered on the examinations. This content is summarized in something called subject matter requirements, or known as SMRs, which are adopted by the Commission for this purpose. The SMRs are developed with advice and input from California educators who are in the content area, and these SMRs are sent out for extensive field review prior to adoption by the Commission. By statute, the SMRs are required to be, quote, aligned with the K-12 student content standards, and thus the K-12 student content standards form the basis for both the examination and the content covered within the subject matter programs. The majority of candidates choose the examination route to meeting the subject matter competency requirement. This is for a variety of reasons. For some candidates, a commission-approved subject matter program may simply not be available. For others who may be older or career changers, They may be unwilling to return to the university for additional coursework, and they choose a more expeditious route of the examination. Or candidates who choose later in their careers or in their undergraduate years may see the examination as a faster route to meeting the requirement than taking any additional coursework. The growth of undergraduate integrated teacher preparation programs, however, may shift the balance of candidates choosing the program route over time. But for all candidates, the demonstration of subject matter competence in the field of their credential serves as the foundational basis for applying that knowledge during teacher preparation and clinical practice experience. In Appendix B, you can find data regarding the volume of test takers as compared to the program route completers. And in Appendix C, as Terry has mentioned, there is information about the available commission-approved subject matter programs in the various content fields. So how does California define competency with respect to the subject matter requirements adopted by the Commission? Well, here again, statute provides some guidance. Statute specifies that the examination must, quote, assure minimum levels of subject matter knowledge by all certified personnel, regardless of the pattern and place of preparation. The statute reflects what we might call a minimum competency approach, and it requires the Commission to set a minimum standard that defines the acceptable level of required subject matter knowledge for the credential sought. So consistent with statute's direction, the Commission currently sets a minimum passing score standard for the subject matter examinations. This is based on a standard-setting study that uses data from actual test administrations with candidates. And for the subject matter programs, the acceptable minimum level of candidate subject matter competence has been a grade of C or better in the required subject matter program coursework.
I'm going to do a little interjection here because I should have explained this earlier. We were not intentionally ignoring special education teachers. When the Ed Code was framed related to subject matter, all special education teachers had to previously have earned a general education teaching credential, so that's not addressed in Ed Code. And by actions you've taken at recent meetings, you've already determined excuse me, that prospective special education teachers have a subset of the list of credentials in that portion of the Ed Code that they can satisfy. It's the multiple subject credential, the core academic areas, including world languages, art, and probably one more that I've kind of forgotten on the top of my head. Thank you very much. We're now just about at the end of section 1 of this report, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how do other states assess content knowledge. Most all states do have a requirement related to content knowledge. In fact, all states were required to do that as part of No Child Left Behind, which, as we all know, is no longer in effect. Many states, this is satisfied by a candidate also passing an examination. But as was mentioned earlier, many of these states have situated their teacher preparation in the undergraduate college years rather than in the post-baccalaureate years. In those states, the individual is earning a college degree as well as their teaching credential at the end of a 4-year program, and they take their exam near the end of that 4-year program, and the exam combines content knowledge with content pedagogical knowledge. California is somewhat unique in that our exam is only content knowledge. It does not cover any content pedagogical knowledge because the candidate is not started their preparation program yet. In fact, in California, a candidate is required to have satisfied subject matter before beginning their true clinical experiences where they are in front of whole classes doing whole class instruction, and definitely before they take over a classroom as an intern. As a little bit of an aside, I was talking with someone from another state, and a state had developed a new assessment for an early childhood credential. And in one state, the programs had offered the program, and people were graduating in June, but only 42% of the people passed the assessment, which meant the people that graduated, they got a college degree, but they did not get a teaching credential. So in that state, to get the credential, you have to earn the college degree and pass the assessment late in their program. There is a comment in here that CSU has been very proactive. CSU does require their candidates to have passed and satisfied subject matter on their way into the program, which is when they don't get to that situation where they have a candidate who's done all their early coursework, they're ready to do whole class student teaching, but they haven't satisfied subject matter yet. And that is something that we hear from a lot of people. They get stuck at that point because you have to satisfy subject matter to be able to move into full student teaching. We're going to now move into part 2 of this agenda item. And what we've tried to do is just pose some questions for you. You know, and we've already explained, we've described the laws that address subject matter preparation and how California is currently addressing this. And it's in accordance with all the laws and the industry standards for legal defensibility because we are talking about a licensure system. We want to give you the opportunity to discuss what might you like to see in the future related to assessing a candidate's subject matter knowledge. We know this is the beginning of a series of items. Before we get into the specifics of the discussion and the questions below in the item, we really want to state, as the item does, that all ideas, options, pathways that are generated in this discussion are going to need to be reviewed for feasibility, appropriateness for state licensure, consistency with current statute, and if the option is not currently allowed under current statute, we would need to consider and get your guidance in seeking a legislative change related to the statute. Dr. Jacobson is now going to highlight the areas that we've identified as questions, although of course you're not limited to those in your discussion.
Thank you. We've tried to group these for ease of discussion into 3 or 4 major categories. So one initial question that might be addressed is, what does it mean to be subject matter competent to teach within the statutory credential areas? We could, for example, look at how other states and other countries address this question, and we might be able to use this information to develop some recommendations for what California should prioritize as the required depth and breadth of subject matter content for prospective teachers. Another area of inquiry could be to look more closely as what does it mean to align SMRs with the K-12 content standards? For example, what degree of alignment is required for candidates completing the examination route, the program route, or any other routes the Commission might develop? How can we assure that candidates are adequately and appropriately prepared to teach the K-12 content standards? What is the relationship between the K-12's content standards and the depth and breadth of the coursework covered in college coursework? And to what degree should these be aligned and expected of candidates? A third area for potential consideration could be whether the Commission sees a need to broaden the current candidate options for meeting the subject matter requirement. And if so, what the potential advantages and disadvantages of additional approaches could be, such as, for example, degree majors, or combining examination work and coursework. And how would the Commission assure that all options would be adequate to cover the subject matter competence of all prospective teachers and are appropriately aligned with the K-12 content standards? In addition, the question of how tightly coupled must the recognized routes to demonstrating subject matter competency be in order to meet the statutory requirement for consistency between these routes? So this is one more thing.
Something I don't think we actually mentioned is this alignment currently. Every item on the CSET exam is aligned to an SMR, a subject matter requirement. Every SMR that's required by an approved subject matter program, those SMRs are aligned back directly to one or more of the state board adopted content standards. So what we would say now, I think, is that the alignment is extremely tight. There is actually an ability to trace it back to the specific K-12 student content standard that exists for the K-12 students is aligned. And so everything that's there is tied back, and everything that's in the content standards is up for assessment. Now go ahead and finish.
Thank you. That was a very important clarification, and I do appreciate that. So this agenda item has provided you with some background information about the subject matter competency requirement, the statutory basis for this requirement, and current options for candidates that are consistent with current statute. The item has also identified some potential areas for the Commission's consideration in moving forward with a review of the subject matter competency requirement. If the Commission indicates an interest in moving forward with this review, staff will develop a plan and a timeline for this project. As Terry mentioned, it's certainly a multiple multiple time endeavor. So this ends our presentation, and we're happy to respond to any questions that you might have.
Thank you. We will now open for public comment. Rigel Massaro, if you can please state your name and affiliation for the record.
Good morning still. Rigel Massaro with Public Advocates. Very much appreciate this issue, and I think staff really hit on the right questions for your consideration. I think even having this conversation is a bold one to have, and I appreciate it, primarily in light of the comments I made earlier. I think reconsidering potentially how we look at subject matter competence may be a critical tool to increasing the diversity of our teaching profession. And subject matter competency is of incredible importance to all of us, and definitely at Public Advocates. The most common complaints we hear from the students that we work with in student-based organizations across the state is that they can tell when a teacher is clearly struggling to teach the content at hand. Students lose confidence in their teacher, and they're not then ready to graduate, prepared for college and career. We know that standardized tests, including our subject matter tests, are very problematic for different individuals. Test anxiety and disproportionately low pass rates for people of color are very real. You look at the CBEST, you can pull up the last report from the Commission. You have first-time passing rate for African Americans is 47.3%. And for Latinx, including Mexican American individuals, it's around 54%. And for white students, it's at about 81%. That's a pretty glaring discrepancy. And thinking about other ways to ensure that those candidates of color can see themselves in teaching is important. I appreciate consideration whether there might be flexibility in our sequence and a combination of test coursework. Admittedly, this is an area I don't know much about. I'm very curious to hear what other states and countries approach to this issue. I also wonder, I feel like this is a moment, and it wouldn't have been the moment a couple of years ago for the Commission to think about whether there's any room for performance assessment in this area. We have our TPA. We recognize that teaching is oftentimes teachers are not learning maybe, but picking up and delivering content. They're learning themselves, especially newer teachers. That was certainly the case for me. And we see trends. My law school no longer requires the LSAT. Wow. Wish that was the case when I was going there. And we know that 900 four-year colleges and universities are looking at scores or making optional the SAT and the ACT. And so I know that that's not a perfect parallel here. I get that. And I just think it's out there. There's good research on it. There are some best practices and maybe worthy of our consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica Sacco. For the record.
There we go. Good morning, Commissioners. Jessica Sacco with the California Science Teachers Association. Thank you so much, staff, for putting this item together. I was very excited to see it posted on the agenda for today. As an organization that represents science educators, K through university, we have a number of members and board members who actually work in the teacher preparation arena. We have positions for 4- and 2-year college directors on our board, and generally those folks are working in teacher preparation. So CSTA is not generally unfamiliar, and we have a good base of members who actually work in this arena. And when I emailed them that this topic was coming up for discussion, they replied back with a number of questions and suggestions that they asked that I bring forward today. And so those include when I reflected on the CSET, the percentage of science educators who are taking the CSET, everywhere from 95 to 99% who are using the CSET as their demonstration of competence of content knowledge. I reflected on the limitations of the CSET in terms of its ability to truly assess the understanding of the 3 dimensions of the next generation science standards. Our science standards are very new, they're innovative, they're unlike any other kinds of standards we've seen. They do have commonality with our Common Core standards in that they are multidisciplinary multidimensional. They include practices. Many of those practices are consistent in ELA, math, as well as science, so you're going to see a lot of commonality of those practices. There's also a great deal of content within the cross-cutting concepts themselves. Sometimes the standards are perceived as all the content being in the disciplinary core ideas. However, there is a great deal of content within the cross-cutting concepts themselves, and we have generally found that those are underrepresented within the SMRs as well as the CSET. Reflecting back when I came to the commission a couple of years ago, we also recognize that engineering, which is one of the disciplinary core ideas within our next generation science standards, is also underrepresented in the SMRs and CSETs. So we would really encourage you to take a look at how well those are connected. I generally appreciate Ms. Clark's comments about the tight connection of the SMRs being tied to the standards, and I agree that those definitely go in that direction. You can see the SMRs make connection to the standards, and those are there. What I question is how much, when you go from the standards back to the SMRs, are we actually getting to all of the standards that are fundamental, necessary, and all of the components of our standards back into the SMRs? So I would appreciate some time to reflect on that during your discussion. Finally, I understand, that we really are trying to get kids ready for college and career that are graduating from K through 12. And in order to do that, we really need teachers who are prepared to teach college and career ready standards. And I think as we look at this, we need to make sure that the subject matter requirements are doing just that. And so I will close with that, and thank you for your time and your consideration and your, one other thing. We really need to work on our physics teacher shortage. I know we have a science teacher shortage overall, but we have a massive physics teacher shortage. So anything we can do to encourage more physics teachers, they are in desperate need. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbara Howard, please state your name and affiliation for the record.
Good morning, Superintendent Torlakson, Commissioners. It's a privilege to be here, and I want to welcome my fellow Riverside member. I am Barbara Howard, the Executive Director of the Center for Teacher Innovation at the Riverside County Office of Education. I just want to thank staff and the Commission for addressing this issue. And my purpose for speaking to you this morning is to affirm from the field the very real need that these, I will say, the obstacle of the CSET is presenting. Certainly, we need a gatekeeper. We want fabulously prepared teachers for our students. But we have two new programs. I think I've spoken to you about them before. The grant that we have 100 classified employees seeking to become teachers. And this past year, we were not able to disseminate a good portion of the tuition that was available to them because they've come to the roadblock. They can't pass their CSET, so they can't get into programs, so they can't utilize the tuition that's available to them. The next exciting news is that we have partnered with Tulare County Office of Ed to launch an intern teacher special education program. We currently have 20 candidates that we're very excited about. And I have to just say, almost as a side note, the student representative at this table a number of years ago really slammed programs that her friends were part of because they weren't being well supported. So that voice in my ear, I hear it often, and we're very committed to supporting those interns. But we have 20. We had 78 sign an intent to register. And of that 78, 46 could not register because they didn't meet the subject matter requirements. So we need to explore what are our options, how can we do this better. And finally, in closing, a very personal story. My precious niece, who is one of the most amazing individuals on the planet, will not give up in her endeavor to become a teacher. She graduated from Cal State Northridge in 2012 in liberal studies, and as you remember, could not get the waiver at that time because of No Child Left Behind. She is back in a CSUSB and applied for the transcript analysis and the waiver. 5 classes. She has to take 5 classes in addition to all of her teacher prep to meet that waiver requirement. So I'm excited that the waiver is there. but still, and she is tenacious, this woman. She is going to be an amazing teacher. But there are many young people who would simply say, oh, that's too much, I'll do something else. And she could do many other things. And also in thinking about Rigel's comment with diverse populations, in our intern program, every single one of those folks is a career changer. Many of them have been school employees and classified employees. These are folks that couldn't incur the debt needed to do student teaching. And so we know that for those folks as well, the CSET continues to be a challenge coming into alternative ed. So thank you for your time, and thank you for addressing this issue.
Janet Davis.
Good morning. Janet Davis, representing the California Federation of Teachers, and partially representing myself as a parent of a kid who has some disabilities, and this is related to this. I'm not going to be here tomorrow, but when I read the 4A for tomorrow, the having accommodations for people with disabilities, I will tell you that I think we need to increase the options. And I think that I'm very happy that this item has been brought forward. I agree with exploring all these options, but it's very hard, just to let you know, to qualify for an accommodation from the CTC, because I was helping my son try to do it. And I go, wow, this is really hard. He really does qualify. He has all these, and I actually had to go back to his therapist. He didn't have an IEP because I did it outside of the system. So I did, like when I was trying to match up the qualifications, just to let you know, it's hard. Okay, so that one tomorrow, even getting into the conversation of an accommodation, that's for extra time on a waiver, but the accommodations for your test, when they have studies that show if you give all, not disabled candidates additional time, they don't score higher. But as we know, if you give somebody with a learning difficulty additional time, they do increase their scores. So it's like, that's, I think, something to consider. The other thing is English is not your first language or your best language, is not a disability, but their pass rates are extraordinarily low. So it's obvious when you look at those statistics every single time in your various reports that having English not be your first language is a barrier to entering the profession. I agree with all those ideas qualifying through different measures, especially the idea that they did in the cloud where you could take partially coursework and partially test, because a lot of the CSET people are not passing one for the multiple subjects. So it becomes a less onerous idea to be taking just a few classes. And also to look at the difficulty of qualifying to be a waiver for the CSUs or other institutions. Look at how difficult or how much easier the CTC might make it for those institutions to be able to offer that waiver. And then also looking at whether the alignment needed for alignment is overly strict, and that they're actually coursework that's excellent for preparation but doesn't happen to match exactly. Thank you.
Thank you. The public comment period for this item is now closed. Commissioners, questions or comments, please. Commissioner Barnes?
Yes, thank you. I find this very interesting, in fact, because of the whole conversation with high school students and the admittance to college, because now the big push is multiple measures. Just recently we were told our community colleges and our CSU, they're not going to be doing placement tests. They're going to be looking at multiple factors. So just as when they start bringing up multiple measures, I just started thinking, well, our students now are going to be admitted into college based on multiple measures, because the discussion has been, we've had students who are very good students, but for whatever reason, they go to take their placement test and don't score. It's an interesting conversation. I'll be interested to see where it goes with our students going on to college, but then it makes me think, well, this might be some of the same students who want to be an educator, and I'm not saying there shouldn't be any kind of test, but that's a movement for letting students into college, so I'm just wondering if that's a discussion, and how you would do that, I'm not really sure. But when we're talking about the test being a barrier, what are some other things that could be done possibly?
I'm going to push pause. I missed a public comment card. Mr. Scott, my apologies. Come on up. Down.
Mayo Guanxi, don't worry about it. Okay. Zhao Shanghao. Good afternoon again. I am Lynn Scott. I'm from Cal State East Bay, but today I'm here for CABTE, California Association for Bilingual Teacher Educators. And while I was a Spanish bilingual teacher for 2 decades in the East Bay, I always wanted to be a Mandarin bilingual teacher as well. I don't have the literacy in Mandarin, unfortunately. What I wanted to talk today is I've been at 2 different CSUs where we have worked on waiver programs. The informal name, but it's the Commission-approved subject matter programs. And it is an arduous process for institutions of higher education to put these together. I am glad, however, of the work that we've done over the past few years to include multiple subjects in this. And so many institutions are currently preparing their subject matter programs. And what comes up to me is that the alignment is very important, and possibly mixing and matching, because these candidates that our members, our CABTE members, notice anecdotally who do not pass are many candidates of color, and especially candidates whose home languages were other than English. So this continues to be a concern for, again, growing the field of bilingual teacher educators. The second area that I'd like you to think, as we're open to possibly having additional means of verifying subject matter competence, and is in the area of the seal of biliteracy. And at the secondary level, as Superintendent Torlikson has pointed out and led the leadership on that, there are so many students that have that seal of biliteracy. For 4 years, we've been working as a committee at IHEs for a post-secondary seal of biliteracy, informally known as a badge of biliteracy. Magali Lavandez at Loyola Marymount is leading that initiative. Zaida McCall-Perez at Holy Names has also been on that committee. And we're moving forward with pilot programs, but it might get you thinking, what would a post-secondary seal of biliteracy or a badge of biliteracy on a transcript from a university, what would that signify in terms of subject matter competency in one of the foreign or world languages, or possibly for meeting the language competencies for bilingual authorization? So just kind of to put out of some other ideas and also inform the commissioners of this work of moving the seal of biliteracy to the post-secondary level. And also we're seeing this as bilingual teacher educators as an incentive to show students the pathways into a teaching career once you have your high school seal of biliteracy or even at the college level. Thank you. Shesheni.
Obrigado, minha culpa.
Sem problemas, a gente fala em português mais tarde.
Thank you. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm a huge proponent of content knowledge and pedagogical content knowledge, and being able to teach the subject that we actually have mastery in. And I'm teaching journalism right now, and during the Constitution Day week, I assigned Constitution Day to some of my students, and I was hovering over them, not in a creepy way, but I was, walking around listening to the conversations as they were developing their questions. And one of the students said, well, I can't come up with questions if I don't know anything about the Constitution. And And that right there was, to me, what having a strong content knowledge is, having a strong base of understanding. Because as teachers, if I'm only going by the knowledge that's in the textbook, I can't ask my students questions to guide them to deeper learning. And I also can't see their gaps in understanding. They may be giving me the answer that they got out of a textbook, but I don't know if they really have a grasp of the topic and they'll be able to move on. I'm not a math teacher, and nor do I pretend to be, but I know that when kids move on from Algebra 1, if they have a C, they have gaps. And so when they get into Algebra 2, there are plenty of gaps that, right, a teacher with that content knowledge is able to see and able to fill in and see where it is that maybe they didn't get that when they had Algebra 1. And the reason I see this is that I'm teaching Avid, and I can see in our tutorials how the students, our tutors, one of the things that I've asked them is to be able to recognize those gaps. Like, where is it that you see that they're failing to understand this topic so that we can get them to the next level? So for teachers to have a strong basis of their content is very important. And also another thing, I was listening to Rigel Massaro, and I remember when my primary credential is in history social studies. And one year I was asked to teach AP Econ, and that's a completely different set of skills. And I was like struggling so much because it's very different than historical thinking. It's very different than government for me. And I was there like, oh my God. And I told my students, we're going to learn this together this year. And I'm sorry, but I'm not teaching this next year because I don't want to be that teacher that gets them through without teaching them what they need to know. And so I think that we really have to have a way, and perhaps it is performance assessments, where we can find out that the teachers have that base to be able to ask the questions that guide students to deeper learning.
Commissioner Klatt?
I think this will be a nice segue to what you said, or I can make a segue, is that for me I'm thinking about this in terms of depth and breadth. And as we transition to Common Core, I really appreciated the idea that we were asking our students to go deep instead of necessarily so wide, the inch deep and a mile wide. And I worry about the C-sets, I being more valuing the breadth rather than the depth. And when I think of people I know who have studied for the C-sets, the tests to them I don't think seem difficult because they're really challenging them in the depth. It's that breadth area. And I'm thinking about, like you brought up social studies. I have confidence that you did wonderfully well, I think, as an economics teacher. I'm thinking, but because of I have confidence that you have the depth in your field that you were able to do that. And so as we're thinking about this, I hope that we can perhaps develop something that validates the depth. And especially in the area of career technical education, which was really where I was going with this, so I'll get to that, is that we've brought that up. We've talked about career technical education quite a bit at this table and the challenges and difficulties there. And when I look, for instance, at the industrial and technology credential and the C-sets around that, and I'm just reading right from our own description of that, that test is supposed to look at someone's competency in building trades and construction, energy and utilities, engineering, manufacturing and product development, and transportation. And I'm thinking, how do we have one test that could sufficiently show depth in all of those areas? I mean, we have one, but I wonder, is that really what we want? So especially as we look at this, that industrial technology credential, I think would be a good, and I know that Ed Code says we have to have a credential in that, and so we can't really control that, but that seems to be a particular area for me that this item brings up.
Ms. Clark, for clarification, then we'll go to Commissioner Marks.
That ITE credential is something we've been thinking about also, because computer science is a big deal now. There are standards that have been adopted by the state board. It's not a required course yet, but it sure seems that industrial and technical education, maybe something could happen like in science, where there's science colon biology, science colon chemistry. There could be ITE colon computer science, ITE colon engineering, and then there could be more of a general ITE. But breadth and depth is exactly the topic, because currently our CSETs address the full breadth of the content standards in these fields, and especially in ITE and in the history social studies, because history social studies by law is one credential and it covers all the broad topics: economics, psychology, U.S. government, European history, world. It covers a whole lot. So it is very, very broad. So maybe one of the questions as we could add to your list is, do we really need to cover the full breadth? Or are there important key areas where we need to look at it in depth? That would be something with 15 single subject areas and multiple subject. We're talking 16 different pieces of information, but that is something that could maybe be spaced out over time, where we could work with expert panels on that idea. What are the key ideas that should be addressed in depth rather than this full breadth, if that is something that you're interested in? I'll be quiet.
Commissioner Marks?
Well, I just want to echo what other educators in the room have spoken. I feel that my experience with student teachers over the last few years has been the obstacles that the CSET presents and how demoralizing they can be and how they are competent. I feel that many of these student teachers that I've talked to are competent and capable and would be enriching to students in a classroom, but these CSETs have become an obstacle to their ability to do that. I'm concerned about the equity issue and the fact that these tests documented fewer minority candidates pass those tests, and being a parent of a child with a disability as well, who wouldn't even attempt to become a teacher because of the CSETs, that's a concern I have. So I'm very excited by these questions and this discussion.
Commissioner Kung?
I'd like to first thank you for all these questions. And the third question about, does Commission need to broaden candidate options for meeting the subject matter competencies requirement? I think so, because, at least from the science perspective, I'm a science teacher, I see that 95% are going through the exam, the CSET route. And although I see that we can pass the subject matter through the Commission-approved subject matter programs, even says in the document that the Commission-approved, the SMPPs are authorized to determine equivalency of courses or programs student has completed at another institution, though it also says that that degrees in content areas are not recognized as meeting subject matter requirements, or the stakeholder credential candidates, program faculty, and others in the policy community periodically ask why degree in particular contents are not recognized as meeting subject matter requirements. And I think that's an important thing, especially in the sciences, because you can have a degree in, say, chemistry, physics, biology, and didn't go to a specific one of these SMPPs, and actually know there's teachers at my school who have, say, a doctorate in biology, and because they did not go to a SMPP institution, and they would have to take the CSET. And it's a really challenging exam, even if you have a doctorate in the field. And so
It's true.
I think there should be other ways of meeting the requirements if you have a degree specifically in that subject. Secondly, the CSET as well, my concern with that as the as one of the requirements is we know the pass rate, at least in the sciences, is not the highest, even with people who have a degree in chemistry, biology, physics. And another concern is, especially with the new adoption of the next generation science standards, I don't know about the alignment with the CSET with the new NGSS. I mean, you said that it was aligned with the current content standards, but I don't know about alignment with the new NGSS requirements.
Commissioner Alvey.
Thank you. First comment, so I may be a little off topic here, but we would all hope that our teachers would have that in-depth and breadth of knowledge. But in the years that we have looked at our staffing and why we have had to let teachers go, it's not because of depth and breadth of knowledge. It's because they have poor classroom management, or they can't get the ideas across, or they can't connect with kids, and those softer skills of teaching, which are not always demonstrated with the excellence of knowledge. I mean, we've had PhDs, incredibly brilliant, who we've had to let go because they could not teach. So I would be in favor of broadening one end of that, which is subject knowledge, to get the other, which is the extra training that we need for our teachers in actually how to manage classrooms and how to connect with kids.
Chair Darling-Hammond.
Well, I thank the staff for bringing this to us. As you can see, everybody's eager to have this conversation. And it may be useful to, as you looked at the charts, you noticed that relatively few people come through a subject matter program at this juncture. Most people are coming into teaching having to come through the CSETs. That's a change historically. There was a period of time before No Child Left Behind when many teachers came through subject matter programs. And the shift to testing was in part triggered by the requirements of highly qualified teachers under No Child Left Behind. So when we used to have conversations about the CSET and the high fail rates, there was a notion that, well, these are really the rare people who will come in and haven't had the experience of a program of studies, and therefore the bar may be higher for them. But that proportion shifted over the years, and now most people are having to come through the CSETs because subject matter programs have disappeared. They've been shrunk in part by those other requirements. So that's happened at the same time that we've had this huge knowledge expansion in the world. Colleagues at Berkeley have been tracking that, and between 1999 and 2003, there was more new knowledge created in the world than in the entire history of the world preceding. Think about that. And knowledge is doubling almost every year. So it's an exponential growth. So we have these CSET tests, which are, to a great extent, picking facts out of this vast expansion of knowledge to see if you remember a fact, rather than measuring depth of understanding. And the other aspect of the disciplines, which is there's sort of the conceptual structure of the discipline, and there's also the mode of inquiry in the discipline. There's scientific inquiry, there's historical thinking, literary analysis, and those are the frameworks that we need educators to bring in with them, an understanding of the structure of the discipline and the mode of inquiry in the discipline. That is what they will then, pin those facts on, right? And so it's an interesting question. How do we ascertain the right kind of subject matter knowledge at this moment in time with new standards, with the expansion of knowledge, with the way in which we want teachers to be able to bring that knowledge to students with the pedagogy that goes with the content that several of you have mentioned. There have been studies of the extent to which knowledge predicts effectiveness for teachers. And in the studies of, for example, math teachers, where you are most often likely to see an effect, there's a stronger influence of having a degree in mathematics or mathematics education than there is having passed a test in mathematics. Tests are always, a small slice of some parts of the knowledge base. In the U.S., they're typically multiple choice approaches to that slice. That is not true in other countries where the assessments of content knowledge are much more problem solutions or essays and demonstrations of a depth of understanding rather than a remembering of a fact. And so, the question of what you can get from a test versus what you can get from a program of studies is one of the questions. So I'm delighted that the staff is opening up this question for us again, because we were pushed, as all states were, in that era, much more towards away from programs of study and towards trying to use the test as the measure. The issues with our CSAT tests have been raised many times before. Pass rates on the tests in math are only about 60-some%. In the sciences, we're in the low 60%. In English language development, we have a new test. The pass rate is only 8% for the cumulative pass rate. So we've got questions about the validity and content of some of the tests. As Commissioner Kung mentioned, majors in the field have difficulty in the math and sciences in passing these tests. So I query what the tests are measuring and how much it actually matches what we need teachers to know and be able to do in those fields. We did an analysis for getting down to facts of the way in which the testing regimen affects the entry into teaching. In general, between the CBEST, the RECA, the CSET, and the TPA, we lose about 40% of the people who say that they want to teach. And in the sciences and math, we lose more than 50% of the people who would like to teach. Some number of people probably should be lost. That is to say, they don't have the basic skills and content knowledge. So it's, but the test that is the most problematic is the CSAT. So people who've passed the CPES, the people who've passed the RECA, people who've passed the TPA may be stopped in certain fields, particularly by the CSAT. So it's a good time to take a look at it. It's a big issue around how do we want to measure subject matter knowledge. I think it's the kind of thing where as I know you're thinking to consider, how do majors factor in? Subject matter requirements also need a second look. They were designed in a particular way, very encyclopedic. We tried at Stanford to open up undergraduate pathways into the beginning of teaching and to create subject matter programs. It was impossible to do. They were designed in the CSU system initially. It was impossible to do in our university because the knowledge base that people already have when they enter the university starts above the level of what the subject matter requirements require you to take. So you'd have to go back to high school curriculum. There aren't survey courses, for example, or general science courses. They're already beginning to specialize at certain levels. So lots and lots of universities have tried to figure out how to offer subject matter programs as they're currently defined and have not been able to figure out how to do it. And that's one of the reasons I think, that they're hard to get those going again. So I really feel like it's great that we're opening up this topic. I think we need a broad look at both what the subject matter program strategy might be, how we might accommodate majors in fields, and how we might rethink the testing that still needs to be available for those who are not able to come through, a program of studies. But I think moving to re-emphasize the program of studies, which gives you the breadth and the depth in a way that is more translatable. And as we've already done, we've begun to require pedagogical content knowledge. And that's a move forward that we did not have previously. I think that is also part of the solution to the question of making sure people have the content and the pedagogy. So just to reinforce that this is a great step, and we're probably going to need to do some deep study to figure out, how to move the agenda forward. And I think we would probably all say the sooner the better. Thank you very much for bringing it to us.
Commissioner Hind.
I just wanted to echo what Chair Darling-Hammond was just talking about, especially with the piece about pulling facts out of the sky to memorize. As somebody who has been a multiple subject credential holder for 18 years now, I decided to try the CSET out. I wanted to see what it was all about, see how hard it would be to pass. So I did go and take it last year. And I was an English major, so I was somebody who majored in my field also that I was taking the CSET in. And I passed 3 of 4 sections, but did not pass the 4th section. And it was the section that was just on polling facts. And it was stuff that I probably did learn 20 years ago when I was getting my English degree, but had to go back and retake it not 1, but 2 times. So it was expensive. I did finally pass it, but I can't say that from that test, I proved that I could teach English. But what I did after that was I took the pedagogy class through UC Riverside Extension, which was amazing. And in that class, I felt like I learned so much that I could go in, and if I chose to go and teach high school, I felt really prepared to teach high school after that. So I think when we're talking about this, and when we come back to the table with this, really thinking about what is our objective for these credential holders, what do we really want people to be able to do in the classroom? In this age of where you can pull facts from any device that you can get your hands on within reach, that's really irrelevant because you can look up a fact in a second, whereas you can't test somebody on the depth of knowledge if you don't know the questions to ask or know how to get them there. So that was it. Thank you so much.
I am loving this conversation. It's so good. And I'll only add one thing. One way that we might also investigate what we want to do is to have some research on some of the things that we already have. I had mentioned a while back that University of California is working a network across 9 campuses to do research that we need to do. And one thing that we just did was submit a data request to the Department of Education and to CTC in order to connect this data to do things like ask candidates who have gone through subject matter programs versus candidates who have taken the CBEST, what are some things we can now understand about them, where they go, who they teach, what they're doing, as well as can we understand what the types of experiences they had in subject matter and undergraduate have led them to do the kinds of things that they're doing in classrooms, and what can we get? What can we understand from that? So research is one thing that I think that we can be doing and will be doing. The other thing is many of our universities, Chair Darling-Hammond mentions the undergraduate programs and the subject matter programs and the arduousness, people have mentioned the arduousness of developing these programs. That said, most of our universities now have undergraduate pathways into teaching. They may not meet the subject matter standards, but they have been designed in ways that work within the contexts of the institution. So University of California has for the past decade had this STEM pathway into teaching. And we are now researching that. And if we can understand the kinds of learning that's happening there, that can also inform what we think we might need to be able to do here. The last thing that I would say is that there are many studies out there about how teachers are learning content, and we know all of the kinds of things that are required in knowledge for teaching content. And what are some of the innovative ways for doing that? So one research project that the center I just mentioned, the UC Center, is sponsoring is at UCLA. They're teaching their elementary math and readings methods classes in elementary classrooms. And the study is trying to figure out how they create the spaces for novice teachers to engage simultaneously with issues of content, pedagogy, children's thinking, and theory. And then how the courses that are offered in the program for teacher learning is both for immediate and long-term enactment. All of this kind of information, I think, can really inform what we're doing here, because we know how critical, as everybody has said, that content knowledge is for teaching, but understanding that in not only in more depth in terms of how it can be done, but how effective it is. Thank you.
Well, this is an information item. Staff was inquiring whether there was interest to move forward with some type of review and to develop a plan and a timeline. And I think that's a big yes. You got that. So thank you, Ms. Clark and Dr. Jacobson. We will now also recess for lunch. And if you could be back, please, at 10 after 1, we'd appreciate it. Thank you. Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to reconvene the Educator Preparation Committee. Item 3C is an update on the development of the California Administrator Performance Assessment. This item is being presented by Amy Rising and Gay Roby. This is an information item. Ms. Rising, will you begin?
Yes, thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I will present most of the item, but we're going to start with my colleague Gay, who's going to give us sort of the foundational overview of the standards that we're measuring and how we got to where we are today. So, Gay, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. The Professional Services Division of the CTC has an established cyclical multi-year schedule of review and revision for all of the programs that they authorize. And these reviews and revisions can sometimes be a very light one and sometimes can be a very deep one, depending on how many adjustments need to be made for updating those program standards. 2010 was the year that was the Administrative Services Credential to be revised and reviewed, and it was a deep dive. And we have done much work in changing it to meet the needs of today, and we're very proud of the work that we have done. All of the CTC's programs are shaped by 3 foundational sets of standards. The first one, the K-12 student content standards, the professional standards of behavior, and program standards. So why the K-12 content standards? Because they are our ultimate client, and ultimately we serve them as the consumer of our services. The program standards identify both the content and the skills, knowledge, and abilities that candidates need to obtain in order to earn the desired credential. And then finally, the professional standards are the qualities our teachers and leaders must exemplify in their everyday professional life. The content standards were not in our purview to revise, but since 2010, we have revised and augmented both the professional standards and the program standards. The program standards were revised to more accurately portray the responsibilities of today's administrator, including equitable access, the role of education in a democratic society, and then taking a very bold step to introduce a performance assessment for administrative candidates, asking candidates to demonstrate that they have the knowledge and the skills needed to become an education leader. The California Professional Standards for our educational leaders, which are also known as the CAPSUL, were informed by national standards of the same. You might know the ISLICs as they were birthed originally, and they have now changed to the Professional Standards for Educational Leader, but they have been contextualized for California's landscape. They're grouped into 6 big categories that encapsulate the responsibilities of today's educational leader, and they serve as a measurement throughout one's professional career for all district and site administrators. The titles of those 6 capsules will show you how broad the range of responsibilities. Standard 1 is the development and implementation of a shared vision. 2 is the instructional leader. 3, management and the learning environment. 4, family and community engagement. 5, ethics and integrity. 6, the external context and policy. However, the capsule are more indicative of a practitioner's level of professional practice, not someone who is preparing to become a practitioner. And the commission decided in 2013 to focus the preliminary program on preparing a candidate. These are usually practicing teachers or counselors or school nurses. They are preparing to be the first day as a site administrator at a school site. Most often in the large cities, a vice principal. Therefore, the part of the latest revision of the Administrative Services Credential was to create a set of professional expectations that were parallel to the capsule, but they were both more foundational and more fundamental, more appropriate for someone who is learning how to be a future administrator. These expectations are known as the California Administrator's Performance Expectations, and the field has come to calling them the CAPES. And they are also the skills and knowledge that are assessed through our California Administrator Performance Assessment. In your item, Appendix E, that starts on page 22, is a table of those professional expectations. They are, the 6 big categories are numbered 1 through 6. Underneath them, specific elements are numbered or lettered, A, B, C, etc. And then the cycles in which they are assessed are marked on that table with an X. I think it is very revealing to note that there are 5 elements that are considered so important that they are assessed in each one of our 3 cycles, which Amy will talk about in a minute. And those 5 are professional and personal learning, school climate, ethical decision making, ethical action, and reflective practice. Additionally, all these performance expectations are introduced, practiced, and assessed at the local program level through coursework and field work outside of the performance assessment. And at this point, I'd like to relinquish the microphone to Amy to discuss the status of the performance assessment.
Great. Thank you, Gay. So this item is an information item, as Commissioner Gonzalez explained earlier. And this is an update on the development efforts we've been engaged with over the last several years to get to this point in time where we are launching our first operational year of the California APA, the Cal APA. And we'll get into the details about how that will roll out in this first year. But we have, in the last 2 weeks, met with the majority of our credential admin programs in really working deeply with them to make sure that they're feeling comfortable and are ready to get started. I also want to introduce Nicole Amador, who's with us from Evaluation Systems, who is our technical contractor. So as Gay was pointing out, we have our revised assessment design standards that this assessment was based and developed based on those standards, and then our California Administrator Performance Expectations, and that is what we are measuring. And so you adopted those back in June of 2016, and we've had many years now to sort of introduce those to the field and to work on developing this performance assessment. Evaluation Systems is our technical contractor, and they've been working with us alongside to develop the assessment and now to administer the assessment. So this item brings forward for your review and discussion findings from the field test and just an update on where we are in this whole process. In this year, which we think of this year as June 1st, 2018 to May 31st of 2019. We're thinking of that as our administration cycle. The candidates who are in programs that are brand new to programs, enrolled in programs from June 1st through, will be engaged in this assessment this year in a non-consequential way. So they will take the assessment, they will complete each of the 3 cycles, they will upload those into the system, those will all be scored, we'll get all that rich data back to inform our thinking, and candidates and programs will get that data back as well, but it will be non-consequential in this first year, which means that there's no fee associated or anything like that. So it's truly a practice year, and that is how we're sort of launching into this important work. So when we get to 2019, 2020, so June 1st of 2019 and around that year, those candidates then would be taking it for in a consequential way. We currently are moving through this year, collecting the submissions, scoring those submissions, and then we'll hold a standard setting study in the spring and bring back to you then recommendations from that standard setting study so that you can determine what standard you would like to set for that first consequential year. So that will be the next time we'll be back to speak with you about the work. So just a little background for those of you who are just joining this work, if you haven't been watching the work. We, back, as I said, a few years we started the work by convening a design team, and we really want to make sure we thank that design team often. They gave us 2 years of their time and worked with us monthly in the first year and every other month after that to really pull this assessment together. And also Commissioner Gonzalez was our liaison to this work, so we thank him for his input and insights as we move through that process. In Appendix B, you can see a graphic online that shows you sort of the interactions as we move through this work and all the different panels and sort of groups of educators that we worked with to make sure that we were measuring what it was, in fact, administrators do in their first years on the job, and that we were moving to produce an assessment that was valid and reliable. To make sure that we were measuring what was appropriate, we took the CAPES that had been redeveloped and conducted a validity study with our contractor in 2016 and made sure that those CAPES were valid for this purpose. And then moved on and made sure that there was no obvious bias in the work by putting the assessment guides and the rubrics and the materials that were developed over the years through our bias committee, that is a standing committee that looks at all of our exam and assessment work, and they did that several times with us over the last couple of years. So that moves us into the structure and the key features of this assessment. So we wanted to make sure that we were all aware of what this assessment entails. So this assessment includes 3 cycles of assessment. Oh, yes, and thank you, Gay, very much. So you were also handed out an overview, so you can take a look at that while I'm talking or take a look at it later, but it provides sort of the high-level overview, the evidence tables for what the candidates are expected to submit for the assessment, and then the essential questions for the rubrics. Last Tuesday on September 18th, we were able to not only provide this to our programs, but also provide the full set of prompts and the full set of 5-level rubrics to everyone. So that work is now in the field, and candidates and programs are engaged with learning deeply about that as they begin to work on this assessment in a collaborative way. So each cycle has 4 steps. And the first step that we ask our administrator candidates to engage in is the step of investigation. So wherever they are working, whatever context they're in, we ask them first to take a look around and understand that context that they're working in. Then they move into a planning step of prompts and evidence gathering. They take that plan that they put together and take action on it in some way or another. And the details of each cycle will come forward as we go through this presentation. And then finally, the last step is reflecting on that work. So this is a 4-step cycle. If you remember back to our last meeting when I was talking about the teaching performance assessment, it also has a similar structure. The hope is that as teachers come through that assessment and then hopefully decide to perhaps be an administrator and come to this assessment, it won't feel brand new and different. So both assessments hold similar structures and properties. That was plan, teach, assess, reflect, and act. This is investigate, plan, act, and reflect. So similar concepts. So this structure really supports an educative sort of philosophy and approach. We expect that as candidates engage in these assessments, they're supported by their faculty and those who they're working with in the school districts, and that they come through the assessment and actually know more when they complete the assessment than when they started the assessment. So in that regard, we also have 3, and they're built in such a way that we'd like them to be done over time so that candidates can do a cycle, submit their work, get their feedback on the rubrics, get some more coaching and support, and then engage in the next cycle or redo the cycle if they weren't able to, marshal enough evidence to meet whatever future passing standard that you set. So 3 cycles. You do have to pass each cycle independently, so you would have to pass cycle 1 and then engage in cycle 2 and pass that, and then in cycle 3. Multiple modalities, just like in the TPA, candidates are asked to submit evidence that we believe and the design team believes and others in the field believe is in fact the work of administrators. So nothing so far in our survey work has led us to believe that we're asking candidates to do things that are not expected of administrators in these early years of work. And they demonstrate their practice through written narratives, videos, plans for implementation of academic priorities, for example. They observe a teacher teaching and provide feedback to that teacher. And then, of course, we ask them to reflect on that practice so that they know moving forward what they might do to improve their practice. Lots of choice in the ways that they can interact with these cycles, so it will be very contextually dependent based on where they're placed to do this field work. And the cycles will reflect actual educators that they're working with in these school sites. Centralized scoring is an important component of this whole system in that everything will be uploaded online. Assessors will be identified and trained and then score online. And we'll be able then to monitor that assessment process very closely to make sure that that is all going well. So it will be a centralized scoring system. And scores will be returned to candidates when this is all up and running and consequential within 3 weeks. We have analytic rubrics. This was a big difference between the pilot and the field test. We pilot tested, learned that our formative rubrics might need some more work. We worked on those, moved into analytic rubric structure, and then in the field test, analytic rubrics were used. We sort of over-designed maybe a little, and so findings from the field test led us to cut back a little bit on those rubrics, and we'll talk about that when we get a little bit more specific. And then, of course, the intent here is to use the results of the APA at some point in the future to help us understand how to focus our accreditation visits and interact with our programs around issues of quality. And then finally, at some point, the data will be on the dashboard for each approved program out there. The 3 cycles were designed by the design team in order. In the pilot, what is now the second cycle was the first cycle, and we got to the field test and switched that order for all kinds of good reasons. And so the first cycle can lead into the second cycle. The third cycle is that observation of a teacher. You can do them, however, in any order that you like because you do have to take them and pass them independently. So programs are deep now in planning around this and thinking about what is the best way to use these cycles in their programs and sometimes really rebuilding their programs to help embed these cycles in their work. So the first cycle looks deeply at analyzing data to inform school improvement and promote equity. So in this cycle, candidates analyze both quantitative and qualitative data sources for 3 years, so looking at some longitudinal data, moving that into expanding on what they're finding in that qualitative work, and then conducting an equity gap analysis, thinking about the underlying causal conditions perhaps for that equity gap, and then building a potential plan to put in place to take action on that. Cycle 1 is the only cycle that doesn't require video recording of practice. Cycle 2 focuses on the administrator candidates' capacity to build and facilitate a community of practice. So they work with 3 to 5 educators, again, at their school on and identify together a problem of practice, work on that problem of practice, identify strategies to address that problem of practice for students, whether it be a well-being issue or an academic issue, carry that out, conduct a series of meetings and facilitate those meetings and begin to look at that early response data to see what kind of impact their work is having and engage with stakeholders. The third cycle then comes back to working with one volunteer teacher to conduct a coaching cycle, and they conduct an observation of instruction, conduct a pre-meeting, the observation, and a post-meeting, and then again reflect on that. The candidate and the volunteer teacher together determine which aspects of the California Standards for the Teaching Profession, the CSTP, that they want that observation focused on, and they move forward from there. And again, moving through that IPAR cycle on each cycle of investigate, plan, reflect, and act. So we took all this out for field, pilot test, learned a lot, changed some things, took it out for field test this past spring and learned some more and have revised again. And so the operational version has some aspects to it that we improved on, we hope, over the summer as we begin this first year of operation. So the field test started in October. Programs had a little bit more time than they did in the pilot to actually try out these cycles. And we wrapped up the field test work in May, and we're able to get the score data back and really dive deep with our technical contractor and the design team and our lead assessors on what can we do to continue to improve this assessment. Of course, all the evidence we collected was kept confidential, and for each cycle we were targeting 100 candidates. So we ended up with 23 programs working with us in the field test and 109 candidates submitting their work for us to take a look at. 30 of those candidates were able to do all 3 cycles. So in the pilot, we had asked programs to do 1 or 2, whatever they felt they were ready to do. In the field test, we said, now let's do 2 or 3. And we did have 30 candidates that were able to do all 3 cycles. We were able to score those submissions and look at that data carefully. In addition, then, at the end of that process, not only having the work from the candidates to look at and study and understand, we did a lot of survey work. So we talked to our program coordinators, to the candidates themselves, and to the assessors through a survey methodology to find out what they thought about this work and got a lot of feedback. In addition, we did 10 telephone interviews with program coordinators because we wanted to explore kind of the impact on programs as this was rolling out. What were they challenged by? What were they able to just take under their work and fold into their programs? So we do have data from those 10 interviews, and the detail from some of that is in your appendix. We were able to score the work from May 7th through June 4th and get that data back to programs so that they could see how candidates were progressing. And there's a table that shows you the number of assessors that we were able to calibrate, which is not enough. We need many, many, many more assessors. We think that this year we'll have approximately 3,000 candidates submit work, so that's 3,000 times 3, that's 9,000 submissions to score. So we are, if you haven't applied to be an assessor yet and you hold an administration credential, we would love for you to apply to be an assessor and come join us. So we are revamping our assessor training for the fall and making sure that we really are preparing our assessors at a level in which they really can calibrate and feel successful and come alongside with us and join us in scoring the work as we move through this first year. So scoring, the scoring process, entails having to identify marker papers, we call them. These are successful responses across that continuum of the rubrics. We use those to train our assessors, and as I said, all the assessment is done online once we get up and running. All rubrics are 5 levels, and each cycle has a set of rubrics. So we have 8 rubrics in cycle 1, 8 rubrics in cycle 2, and 7 rubrics in cycle 3. So some general findings from the field test. We were able to determine through the survey data that everyone, the candidates, the program coordinators, and our assessors felt, in fact, that the assessment was aligned with the CAPE. So that was a good finding. But we needed to make sure that that was the understanding from the community we're working with. We moved on and asked questions around whether or not candidates' practice was changing, and we were able to determine, again, that candidates' abilities, for example, to establish rapport with school staff, coach and collaborate new teachers effectively, and reflect on their practice had improved by engaging in this assessment. So again, good news. Candidates and coordinators indicated that they felt well informed and supported during the field test process, which was great. We had a number of strategies in play to support them. Thursday, every week, you could call us and talk to us. We had face-to-face workshops and supports and a lot of online support from evaluation systems around the video technology and other aspects of the online system and uploading work and things like that. So people felt well supported. Coordinators and assessors reported that they did understand the training when they came through it and that it did prepare them for their role, and that they thought they were confident in the scores they did assign. So again, like I said, we are working towards really identifying very clear marker papers to train our assessors deeply so that they can be scoring, and we can look for that high inter-rater reliability so that we know our scores across the state are all scoring in a consistent way. Programs did tell us that they would like some additional guidance in supporting candidates, particularly around the uploading of videos. We asked them to record everything and then go back and clip out sections to show us particular parts of their practice, and it's that clipping of the video that we're building additional supports to help folks figure out. And then another point from the research was that members grappled with, and this actually was an ongoing discussion with the design team over the 2 years, and is still perhaps a lingering question for some, but whether we should have had 2 cycles of assessment or 3. So for quarter programs, 3 cycles fit neatly into each quarter. For semester programs, a little more work to plan for how they were going to support candidates and fit this work into that program. You know, we encourage them to think about what these assessment cycles, because we wanted them embedded, might take over some signature assignments they already have. We don't want to bury our candidates in work, obviously, so maybe some things needed to be moved around or rethought. So as I said, this is new for our programs. We're really appreciating the non-consequential year because that gives programs more time to do that kind of very deep work and look at their programs and think about how they're embedding this. But because that was an outstanding question, we wanted to make sure that we closely looked at the data for the 2 versus 3 cycles. And there are some graphs in your item that show for the 30 who did complete all 3 cycles, they actually performed slightly higher than their candidates that completed 2 or 1 cycle, and that's that dark blue line in your graphs. So it was a small N. It's not really generalizable at this point in time, but it was first entry-level data that we collected. And if you look at those lines, you can see that for cycle 1, 2, and 3, candidates who did all 3 cycles seem to do slightly better. So perhaps we could hypothesize that having 3 to do was not keeping them from being successful. So we looked at clarity and ease of use, opportunity to demonstrate knowledge, skills, and abilities, fairness and authenticity, and again, more details around some of those findings are in your appendix. If you have questions, we can talk about them. And then our 10 interviews were conducted to try and get that more personal, person-to-person kind of feedback around how programs were dealing with implementing this assessment. And we were able to find out some very interesting things and, you know, again, more food for thought on how we could continue to improve the system. All of that data, when it was put together, was presented to the design team, and they were able to give us feedback about their opinion about what they thought the data was telling us. And based on all of that, and work with our technical contractor and our measurement specialists, we revised the assessment this summer for operation. So the non-consequential year, just for a second here, just so you understand that. As I said, candidates starting June 1st of 2018 through May 31st of 2019 will be considered a non-consequential candidate. So even if you enroll in a program on May 31st and we have a voucher for you, you will be considered non-consequential and you will have time to complete the assessment. If you start a program in June, then you become part of the consequential cohort, and you will move forward and have to meet that passing standard. So that's coming. There are a number of reasons why programs needed more time that are sort of provided for you in the item that, you know, are very logical and what one might expect. So I don't want to go over them in too huge of detail, but it really, these embedded assessments, you really do have to have the time to sit down with your faculty and really look at what you're doing and then embed. And the second issue was kind of around placements. We have candidates that are coming into admin programs that might be in school placements and they're still teaching as teachers or what have you. So we had to do a lot of discussion and thinking around how to support those candidates and how we think about field placement for administrators. And do we want to make sure that we're getting administrators into school settings that allow them to be successful in these cycles? You know, what does that mean? What does that look like? And how do we make sure that they're in settings where they can be successful in these cycles? So that conversation is well underway amongst our programs. The other issue is that for the admin credential, we have administrators who are nurses, who are librarians, who are also pursuing this credential, and the big question was, how does this work for them? So we have been working through those issues as well. And so, again, I think all the programs and all of us really appreciate having this non-consequential year to figure out how to support that wide range of candidates when we need to support them. A decision had been made that this credential and this assessment would focus on the school building level. And a lot of our candidates may be working in a district, for example. So we're working through how do we make sure then that that candidate has a school that they're focusing on and can understand that school level context. So we just wanted to point out, too, that the fund, this non-consequential year wasn't, free, so we needed to find funding for that. And the funding did come out of our testing development fund. And once the assessment goes live, candidates will be paying their own fees, and or we hope programs will find ways to make fees part of the program tuition or come up with other ways to support their candidates with these fees. But for Cycle 1, the fee is $125. Cycle 2 and 3 are $150. And again, each cycle is taken independently, so they take the cycle, pass the cycle, and then move to the next one, paying individually as they go. All right, so that brings us to next steps. So now that we're moving into our operational year, on October 9th, the registration system goes live, and candidates can go online and register for this non-consequential year, upload their work, and then we will begin the work of scoring it and getting that data back to candidates. So, as I said, on September 18th, it was a big day. Finally, all of the final version for the field work for the operational year was released to programs, and they have been invited to share that with faculty and students, the assessment guides and the rubrics, and most importantly, with the field, because our candidates are out there in schools, and the people supporting them at the school district level need to understand this assessment as well. So there's many involved in this work that need to come along and learn about these assessments. We're launching the registration system on the 9th of October, and then we're continuing to provide support to programs. So last week we were able to meet with folks in Riverside County. Thank you for hosting us. It's a wonderful facility that you have. And we worked with many programs. Gay, do you remember how many were with us? About 65 people.
Both last week and this week, probably 20 to 23 programs last week and this week.
Yeah, and then this week we're here at the Sacramento County Office of Ed, so thank you to the Sacramento County Office of Ed for hosting us. In a few weeks, we're going to be at Torrey Pines at National, meeting with the final program. So Gay has done a great job of getting every single program to come and be with us at a workshop. So that's very exciting, and we're really happy to meet with people in person and work with them. In addition to our face-to-face workshops, which, by the way, I should pause and say have been funded by the Wallace Foundation. We were able to join in some work that San Diego State had received a grant to work on administrator preparation, and the commission was part of that. And so we had a little bit of funding to help host these workshops. So this is actually our third round of workshops, and we just found out we're going to get a little bit more funding next year. We'll be able to do a fourth round. So we've been really trying to be with the programs and build that comfort level with this assessment. We offer weekly office hours on Thursday mornings from 11 to 12. Anyone can call in and talk to us if they have questions. We are now also offering monthly think tanks, we call them, and we're inviting programs as they begin to figure out ways to support their faculty and their candidates with this assessment to come online with us and share those best practices with each other. And those have become successful, I think, opportunities for people. We're getting some good feedback that people are finding those useful. And then we do have lots of other on-site website-based supports and structures in place, and lots of tutorials about how to deal with the video and how to upload the video and how to be successful with this assessment. So our first submission dates are coming up this fall, and we're looking forward to seeing those submissions and working to understand them and score them. And trainings for assessors will begin next spring, really late winter. In February is our goal. The standard setting study will come along after that once we have that wide, diverse range of submissions later in the spring, and we'll be back with you in the spring or summer to talk about a passing standard. And that concludes my presentation. our presentation. So, Commissioner Gonzalez, back to you.
Thank you. The public comment period for this item is now open. Peg Winkleman, if you can please come up and state your name and affiliation for the record.
There it goes. Really green. Peg Winkleman, California Association of Professors of Educational Administration. First of all, thank you for all of the collaboration with the CTC staff and the Commission in creating an authentic, embedded performance assessment to promote best leadership practices. I was thinking about our conversations earlier around teacher preparation and the importance that assessment really assesses what we want to see in the field. Yes, so I understand that your think tanks have been incredibly well attended. In fact, I had to give up my seat yesterday. Out of those think tanks, though, I have received several questions from the field, and so I think I've succinctly put this together. Think tank participants expressed a concern that the next step involved more than just standard setting. Okay, so the pilot programs see issues with the directions and rubrics that have not been completely resolved, and programs not involved in pilot and field test just received the directions, rubrics, etc., and want to know that their feedback will be considered in this non-consequential year. So the question is, will we reconvene the design team beyond standard setting to consider feedback from this non-consequential year? Thank you.
So to respond, Peg, to your question, we definitely will be continuing our survey research. And at this time, the design team participates more as assessors and lead assessors and in different ways. So I would have to say at this point, we do not have scheduled a meeting of the design team again moving forward. It doesn't mean that we couldn't do that. And if there's an interest in us doing that, we could explore that because we do want the feedback.
Thank you. That was the many emails and texts that I received since they just saw the rubrics. You know, they were just released last Tuesday, so immediately we got a flurry of responses. And so thank you for considering a reconvening. Yeah, it would be very meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, and I can't express enough how new this work is in the field, right? So we are the second state in the United States that is moving forward with an administrator performance assessment of this kind. And we were able to work with our colleagues in Massachusetts, and we learned a great deal from that work. But this is really new. In the field, new in California, right? And I'm sure my friends will back me up here on this. And so we are definitely still in a position of learning and wanting to make sure that we do develop an assessment that does measure what we say it measures and helps move administrators forward in such a way that they feel more confident and capable in doing the job of an administrator, and that data that comes back is helpful to program so they can think about how to best support candidates. And as Gay said earlier, you know, our ultimate customer is making sure our students are learning well and deeply in California and are supported and are in safe learning environments. And so that whole continuum, we need to keep making sure that this assessment is moving us towards a good place and not keeping us back from learning or allowing the right administrators and the best administrators into our schools, et cetera. So I appreciate that feedback. And yes, we will continue to study this. It is new work. Things always can get better and tighter. So we do want to keep having that feedback coming back.
Thank you. The biggest concern for those of you who've been following this whole process is that we not discourage or eliminate any leader. It's very parallel to the conversation, as I said, that you had around teacher preparation, who should be leading. So we want to make sure that what's asked, the way it's asked, all of those pieces are equitable and that we don't lose those who we very much want to serve the students of California.
Thank you. Dr. Ivania Soto, if you can please state your name and affiliation for the record.
So good afternoon. Ivania Soto. I am actually professor on leave from Whittier College, working with the California Association for Bilingual Education on a grant that is supporting the Bilingual Teacher and Administrator Pipeline Program. So hence my comment on this item. And so we appreciate the equity focus in cycle 1. And what we'd like to have happen is to have that equity piece built upon in cycle 3, right? We're concerned with, right, the ability of leaders, of administrators to work with teachers who serve English learners and who also lead bilingual schools, right? And at CABE, one of our initiatives that's part of the grant that I'm directing is a dual immersion administrator leadership series where we're embedding, kind of connecting back to the conversation in the morning, Global 2030, the EL roadmap, and the guiding principles for dual immersion. So we want to make sure that those pieces, right, the equity pieces in cycle 1 extend out and connect into cycles 2 and 3. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. John Borba, if you can please state your name and affiliation for the record.
John Borba, Professor of School Administration, California State University, Stanislaus. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this item. First of all, I wish to say, express my appreciation to Gay and Anne, Amy. Amy, they've done an excellent job of providing support to my colleagues and me. Tremendous amount of resources made available. Although I'm not a big fan of test companies, I do have to say that Nicole Lamador and Lori Thornley, they're awesome. They do a great job of providing support to my colleagues and me. It's greatly appreciated. Also, all 4 ladies, they did a tremendous job of organizing and presenting the APA workshop, which I attended one of them yesterday. You call it a think tank. And it was well worth it. It was worth driving 80 miles. It took 2.5 hours to get to Sacramento, and getting back home 2.5 more hours. It was well worth it. A couple of things. I think it's really important to continue to refine the APA assessment for the consequential year. I do have a concern, continue to have a concern with cycle 1, steps 1 and 2. I shared my concerns last year with the design team, and I responded to this issue on surveys and questionnaires, and I believe progress has been made in addressing that item. I see changes in this year's version of the APA, positive changes. My issue is lack of clarity in steps 1 and 2. For example, it could be interpreted that steps 1 and 2 require 3 separate equity gap analyses. For example, in one section, it asks students to got to read my notes here. There's one section that requires the students to identify equity-related patterns and/or trends. That's one area. And then another area of the instructions, it asks students to identify an area of focus related to equity. Then in another area, it asks students to conduct an equity gap analysis. And by that time, they may feel they've already done it twice. There are people that may totally understand this, but I believe that students could have trouble with the interpretation of those particular directions, and instructors as well. The other issue, there are words that can be interpreted as interchangeable concepts and words, terms like selecting an area of interest, identifying a focus area, investigating a focus area of interest, identifying an educational area of need. These are in the first two steps, and it could be candidates could interpret this as, are these words, do they mean the same? Is it the same thing that I'm supposed to be looking for or identifying? So what I'm asking is that steps 1 and 2 continue to be looked at, and possibly ways of providing greater clarity to the candidate would, obviously to me, would be very useful. The other thing is that obviously a very limited number of educators involved in the implementation or involved in the piloting and field testing. There's a very limited number, and I would think it'd be important to get more or collect more data on cycles 1 and 2. There's a question of whether they should be collapsed, and that's something that I would continue to look at. I really appreciate the work that West Ed has done. I believe that their study provides a lot of useful information that deserves serious consideration in terms of fine-tuning the APA. And I just also want to say I appreciate the support that I have been getting as a director of the program at Cal State Stanislaus, and I will continue to depend on all four of you a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no more public comment cards, we'll close the public comment period for this item. Commissioners, I'll open the floor for questions and comments.
Thank you for all of this work. As you were walking us through the agenda item, I was once again impressed with the thoughtfulness and the strategic thinking, as well as the formative sources of support for the field out there. So thank you very much. As I was looking around, and you know my frame these days is multi-tiered systems of support and how gen ed and special ed work together, I'm not seeing that jump out at me, and I think instructional leaders play such a critical role in promoting and supporting collaboration across educators on their school site. So has there been any conversation with the field? Has that come up? I don't think we need to name MTSS unless there's agreement to do that, but something about ensuring that educators can work together with one another and parents to provide education for all kids.
So across the 2 years, there was definitely a strong desire to push on the issue of equity and developing equity-driven leaders. The concept of MTSS is still evolving, I believe. You know, I guess it strikes me, having the privilege of being both with the TPA group and with the APA, that we talked more about it at the teacher level, perhaps. But this is certainly something that I would say was part of our conversations, and it probably could be brought a little bit more to the forefront in this work. And certainly as we move forward, we could think about that and how we might do that to support that
capacity then for programs to help their administrators understand what MTS is and to think about how to support students to learn in that least restrictive environment. So thank you for those comments.
Can I add just a little to that? Because I think I love that question because I'm as intrigued by this work as you are. I think that there's a tension in building a performance assessment for administrators based on the vast array of capes and cakes that we have. And if you know what I'm talking about right now, you've been at this table a long time. Right. That's the performance expectations for administrators and the content expectations for administrators. Within that broad set of standards, I think we do push on inclusion and inclusive practices and in working with teachers to effectively enact their instruction in whatever setting they're in. And of course, the APA is going to be a sample of things that we can actually ask them to perform within the context that they're in and score against some subset of those things. But I would say there's a very clear commitment in this APA to teachers working collaboratively to identify problems of practice, to brainstorm and think together across their practices about what are the driving causes of these problems of practice and how can we as a community resolve them. And in any school setting, that problem of practice could focus on inclusion, but it could also focus on tardiness and absenteeism, or it could focus on social emotional learning. And so in the performance assessment itself, I think it was necessary to not over-determine where they would land in identifying that work, but to allow it to emerge from whatever context it was in. But what we absolutely commit to here is, first of all, understanding what the data might be telling you about what's happening at your site, and to have an equity lens about that. And equity most certainly attaches itself to inclusion. Equitable access to instruction is at the core of that for all students. And second, and paired with that, having teachers work together on understanding what those data tell them about their practice and work collaboratively with the leadership. I think we've put a stake in the ground with that about what this commission's priorities are in examining practice before licensure. But it's in a broader context of a whole curriculum and set of experiences that they get in their admin prep program. Is that fair to say?
Chair Darling Hammond.
Taking notes.
Well, bravo, all the work that's gone into this. And, to the points that was just being made, I think figuring out how to lodge these big ideas in the different contexts that candidates have has been part of the genius of this process and part of the challenge. But I think that these three areas are really good areas. I am quite sure you'll get lots of the most important feedback from the candidates and the professors who help them. I had two small thoughts I just wanted to ask about for you to keep an eye on.
Sure.
And, obviously this is not the most important feedback you will get. In the analyzing data to inform school improvement and promote equity, first of all, I'm really glad that it has that equity orientation and the use of the data. The Step 3 Act, it really asks them primarily to get feedback from, it looks like a single key stakeholder. That's a tiny action. They're not actually implementing the plan. And it occurs to me that in the real world of school leadership, part of the challenge is that you get feedback from lots of stakeholders who have different points of view, and then you have to kind of weigh and balance and reflect on those. And I don't mean to suggest overloading the candidates, but I do wonder whether if processing feedback is part of the goal, we might ask them to have more feedback from more widespread sources.
That was definitely a point of discussion for many of our design team meetings. How much could we ask these early candidates to take on at the school that's not their school? And how can we support the concept but not overwhelm the candidate? So we finally negotiated down to at least one stakeholder. And got to keep it in the cycle. But I think you're right. And I think as this idea of having a performance assessment becomes more and more of a reality and we all have time to get used to it, we can come back and revisit some of these expectations as we see practice change. But
I don't think I had processed the point that you just made, that a school that's not their school. So this is a school where they're doing some kind of a clinical internship, or
in the sense that you're a teacher in the school and you're not on the leadership team.
Right.
And so there was a lot of sensitivity about how do we support a candidate step up out of the role of teacher into the role of leader when they're not really the leader.
Right.
So, but we want them to become leaders. And it was really fascinating. A lot of the video work made that really clear. We saw teachers teaching other teachers as teachers. It was really fascinating that we weren't seeing the leadership yet coming through, because that's really a hard step to take. So, we'll keep watching it, but so that's what I meant. And some are at a district office and they might be working with multiple school sites. So that's even a different issue that we're kind of thinking through what that looks like for them. And then of course,
you can reflect. You can reflect on that recommendation.
Thank you. Well,
but I do think that if you're not going to put something into action, one of the key things is thinking about the fact that there are many points of view, and how do you make sense of those, and then not get paralyzed by that, but find a path forward with some grounding. In the cycle 3, it asks that the coaching, you select up to 5 video clips from the post-observation meeting that provide evidence of your coaching. Does the coaching have to occur in the post-observation meeting, or can it occur subsequent to that meeting? Because you might actually be doing coaching, which would be even more exciting.
It would, yes. Yes, it would be. And again, lots of conversations around even what is coaching.
Right.
So we're really building our understanding of that as we're working with all of our programs out there. And the decision was sort of to contain it. The pilot had 2 cycles of coaching and observation to try and see if change had happened from coaching cycle 1 to coaching cycle 2. And that was like we took a way big step too far beyond what we really could handle. So in the field test, we came back to 1 cycle, and we kind of anchored it in the pre-observation, then the actual observation of the instruction, and then the post-conference. So again, a great point, and maybe we can broaden it to say that those clips don't have to necessarily be in the post-conference.
It could be in the
coaching really happens in lots of different ways over time. So good point.
Good work. This is really very exciting, and I'm quite sure that it will evolve as we get the feedback and as we learn, as it has along this whole journey.
Yeah.
Commissioner Barnes?
Actually, I was going to make a comment on the MTSS, but I've learned a lot being on the PPS Credential Committee, and so then it clicked in my head about it's in the expectations, because this is an assessment. So as I went back through and read the administrator expectations, while the term MTSS isn't like broad, like spelled out, I see it embedded in there. And then, of course, my mind went to, that's everything we talked about at the PPS credential about how important it is to make sure we have in ours MTSS. But we all work together. So I will say it's embedded in there. It just may not be standing out as MTSS. So,
if I may add, also just to echo on that, there was a concerted effort by the design team not to specifically call out those research proven practices because they're not equitably distributed or in practice from district to district. So we avoided PLCs just because the PLC in our district looks different in this district. MTSS in your district compared to ours, PBIS. So we did go back to those expectations. Commissioner Hein?
I just have a question. Under the cycle steps where it says template provided, is that template created already? Do we have a way to look at it, or?
Yes. So those, that was the exciting moment on September 18th, where we had sent this out in August, and then we have the full set of prompts, templates, rubrics, every level available, so we can get that to you. Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Sloan?
Great presentation and such amazing work over time, and also tremendous how the field has really helped develop the assessment with all of you. I was also thinking about some of the comments of the people come to the table, and I also had an opportunity to talk with some of my colleagues at UCLA and Berkeley in their principal leadership institutes, because they were part of the first group of implementers. And so I'm also reminded about when we first implemented TPA in our programs. We started from a place where we hadn't had TPAs before, and that's where these administrative programs are starting as well. We somewhat fortuitously had a long time to just practice implementing TPA because it was an unfunded mandate, and so the requirement was taken off the table for a while. So some programs chose to implement anyways over a long period of time without it being consequential to certification. Some programs made it consequential to their own program completing. And we learned a lot. Programs got to learn a lot. And the TPA developers got to learn a lot by the amount of time that we had. So that's all to say, I think in the end, we had created much better TPAs, and they're even better now because of the experience that we have. And I think that could be true. I would imagine that would be true for APA as well. And we have to balance, when do we want it to be implemented? When do we want to keep learning more about it? So I'm glad that there is this field experience year. And I would also echo the requests that more information gets back to the commission and the design team. And then I would urge us to just take a look at all of that and see, do we need even more time? One of the things my colleagues was sharing with me is that creating the fieldwork experiences really means working very closely with your partners in K-12 schools to refigure what all of that can look like. And partners in K-12 schools really have to be a part, especially of the administrative preparation work. So having that time to develop those experiences together may be very important. The other thing would be, I know there have been a lot of concerns around 2 or 3 cycles, as Professor Borba put up. And if programs also have input on that, not only just the cycles of the APA, but the other really spectacular thing about our accreditation system now is we require all of our admin prep and teacher prep to show us where all the standards are introduced, practiced, and assessed. So if there are other ways that programs can show us this is getting assessed better in this way than it is maybe in this assessment, let's look at that. Not to say that I'm sure you have, but let's just keep looking at that. Finally, I would say that there is some independent research that has just come out in August that Professor Borba referred to. Wested and their California Comprehensive Center in Berkeley did some research on the initial implementation. Be good to bring that into the conversation too. And then finally, this doesn't have to do with the Cal APA development necessarily, but I always want us to come back to, once we have this, is there something we can do about the CPACE?
We'll be happy to bring that topic back at a future meeting to consider that. It really has been, it's been a comprehensive effort, and I mean, it's grabbed all of our attention to build the APA and the TPA, and we so appreciate that. I mean, we all appreciated in the end the ramp up time we had with TPA because of what a change factor that was in teacher preparation. We know that this is going to have the same kind of development opportunity within the admin prep community, and which is why we went for a non-consequential year. And why we are thrilled to be participating in the Wallace Foundation grant, which has given us the opportunity to be deeply out there in the field, working with all preparation programs as they grapple with how this fits within their curriculum, et cetera. I don't know that we have the luxury of a 5-year window. We were funded. We were expected to have this consequential this year. And we had some interesting conversations in the legislature as we asked for an extension. There's some eagerness. There's a sense that we really do have to make sure that in every case, the administrators who get their first credential are ready to begin. Unevenness in the experience of credential holders has driven us for years along this pathway to create these authentic performance assessments. So I think we will constantly be evaluating what we find with every administration of this, what it's telling us, where we're doing things that don't need to be done, where we're missing something we need to do, and that we will be continuing to refine it over the years. So,
can I just to add to that as well. So I do look forward to getting the information back because I think the programs who piloted this year self-selected. Right, to
the field test, yeah.
Field test,
pilot and field test,
pilot and field test, and so it's not a random sample by any means, right?
Right, and just to help everyone understand too, we have 62 accredited, 65 accredited administrator programs, and we had somewhere between 23 and 27 programs even begin to work with us in the pilot or the field test. So still the majority of programs, they are experiencing this year for the very first time what it feels like to embed. And that's why we're trying to be so supportive and be available on a weekly basis and really be there for the questions because, right, like so many things in life, until you get into it, you don't know what your questions are. And then you're in the middle of it and then you have 1,000 questions. So it will take us many years, I think, to really get to a point where we feel like this is really the assessment that we all, collectively say, yes, this is helping move practice forward in a way we want it to. So it does take time. Thanks.
Commissioners, any other questions or comments? Well, thank you to I'm sorry, Commissioner. Yeah.
I was just going to say that I am currently in the Administrative Services Credential Program, so I will let you know how it goes.
That's really exciting.
At a school that's their first year offering it at CSC Monterey Bay, so I will let everyone know how it's going.
Thanks again to staff and pass on our appreciation to our partners, our consultants, the design team, everyone out in the field that continues to provide information. And as we continue to keep this process as fluid as possible and continue to refine our practice. Thank you very much. This is an information item. We're going to move on to item 3D. This next item is an update on creating a work group to explore solutions surrounding career technical education issues. This item is being presented by Jake Schuler and Bob Locks. This is an information item, and Mr. Locks, you will lead off, sir.
This agenda item is an update on the status of the directive from the 2018 Commission meeting to work with other agencies and stakeholders in addressing the need to ensure that students continue to receive high-quality career technical education programs. With the influx of grant dollars earmarked for CTE, the need for more CTE teachers, and ensuring all students are receiving a CTE program that is preparing them for the 21st century has continued to be a challenge. At the June 2016 Commission meeting, staff presented information on how single subject teachers could earn their CTE credential and what the requirements were for CTE teachers to earn their single subject credentials. From the discussion at this meeting, the Commission directed staff to begin work with the Department of Education to assemble a group of CTE stakeholders to identify strategies that can increase the number of CTE teachers. This group came up with 4 recommendations that were shared with the Commission at the December 2016 and February 2017 Commission meetings. While none of these recommendations were accepted, what was evident is that CTE has many facets, and just preparing more teachers would not ensure quality programs. Over the next 16 months, there were several discussions with stakeholders, visits to CTE school sites, and attending of conferences gathering data. And in the spring of 2018, West Ed's California Comprehensive Center sent the Commission a list of potential areas of exploration when reviewing our approach to CTE credentialing. And you can see this list from West Ed in Appendix C, which starts on 3D5 or page 6. And essentially this list was 50 questions, kind of in-depth questions on what we can do to look at CTE and maybe make some changes. This list helped to jumpstart conversations between the Commission staff and the Department of Education to look at CTE through a different lens. We brought the information from these conversations to you at the June 2018 Commission meeting, and we're directed to begin to work with West Ed and the department, along with other constituents, to identify possible approaches to addressing issues related to the CTE, including the shortage of teachers.
So we would like to thank Rose Owens-West from the California Comprehensive Center at West Ed, and also Donna Wyatt and Michelle McIntosh from the department for being full and cooperative partners in this work. Donna Wyatt is with us today at the table. Thank you to Donna for being here and waiting patiently to sit with us at the table, and to show the full cooperation between the agencies on this work. While the initial work of our staff team is focused on convening an advisory work group that will meet in Sacramento, the work will also be informed by a larger statewide stakeholder group that we will ask for feedback and input throughout the process. If you look on the graphic of Appendix A on page 4, it lays out the theory of action for the work that we're doing. So the needs that will be addressed include recruiting and retaining high-quality CTE educators and maintaining a support system for those educators. The inputs to address these needs include staff time, student data, and the expertise of CTE stakeholders from across the state. The core functions of the work will include staff coordination of the work group meetings, analyzing current CTE policies and statute, and gathering input and feedback from the field. The outputs of the work will are intended to include consistent statewide guidance and recommendations for possible revisions or amendments to current CTE policies and statute. Lastly, our goals for the outcomes of the work would include improved consistency between our agencies, reduced shortages in CTE teachers, ongoing partnerships with industry, and ultimately high-quality CTE programs. Appendix B on page 5 is the timeline, and as you can see, we're already engaged in this work. The application is expected to go out early next week and be due back on October 26th, and we expect to have selected a group hopefully by December 1st. The advisory work group will meet throughout the first 4 months of 2019. Staff will brief their leadership and report to the Commission in April through June, and the goal is to have a preliminary report for both agencies in the summer of 2019, and then a final report published by West Ed in September 2019. That concludes our presentation, and we're available to answer any questions you might have.
We will now open for public comment. Janet Davis. If you can please state your name and affiliation for the record. Danette Brown, if you can please state your name and affiliation for the record.
Good afternoon, Danette Brown, representing the California Teachers Association. And we are super excited about this work group. Our members have really been expressing to us, concerns around this area. And I know we've had discussions here before about it's complicated. It's super complicated. And to echo what Janet Davis just mentioned, every time I learn more about CTE issues, I find out how much I don't know. And with that, part of our excitement is being able to reach out to our CTE members who have really been trying to bring this issue to the forefront for many years now and tell them, guess what? Look for your application to serve on this work group because it's happening. And we really believe that this work is going to move us forward in the spirit of making sure that our students are college and career ready. Having said that, we also would encourage during the selection process with the applications, and maybe you already thought of this, but what we've heard from our members is that there are unique challenges to certain industry sectors that may not happen in other industry sectors. So as we move forward with populating this work group, we would hope that there are educators from a variety of those industry sectors so that we can really address the challenges that may be unique to one. Thank you so much for your efforts.
The public comment period for this item is now closed. Commissioners, questions, comments? Commissioner Brown.
This is an excellent topic and an excellent area to investigate. And as someone from the community colleges, where much of career and technical education happens, and from the community college structure that is really looking at strong workforce development, this is spot on and time. It will be really interesting for all of us to learn more about this. I was just doing a little, taking a few notes myself and realized that career and technical education do encompass many areas, from early childhood and child development through business and marketing. Professional programs at our college include automotive technology, cosmetology, massage therapy, health sciences, medical and dental assistance, fire service sciences, transportation, fashion, hospitality. It's really wide-ranging. And so it will be important to have those various areas represented somehow. That doesn't mean we have a group of 250 as a work group. But I think that the community colleges can be definitely need to have to participate in this. The three organizations that I thought about right away, besides the Chancellor's Office, were the Faculty or Academic Senate of the California Community Colleges, as well as looking into organizations such as the California Community College ECE Faculty and Staff Association. And there, again, I'm not saying there should be 250, but when you think about the list that I just generated, knowing what's going on in the district and in community colleges, it's broad and good broad, because if we look at what we want to do with dual enrollment and what we want to do with career and education, we're exactly positioned to be doing this. So I, for one, am really looking forward to seeing how you're doing, maybe participating in that. And I certainly offer the opportunity for the community college as an institution of higher education that does lots of career tech work to be involved. It's time. I'm glad.
Commissioner Klatt.
It may come as no surprise that I'm really excited about this item, since I think I've brought it up quite a bit. So thank you so much. I think the questions that you've developed are really interesting ones, and I'm really interested to find out what comes of these questions. And I want to echo some of the comments. I think it was Janet's comment about geography and the importance of that. I wanted to point out two things in the questions. Just one, I love that you included in here collaboration with non-CTE teachers too, to look at that question. And also the questions related to bringing in CTE teachers that represent the diversity of the populations, and you call out gender, like with especially with STEM, with girls in STEM and girls in CTE. I also would be interested to ask the question about boys in fields that are traditionally female dominated also. So when we're asking about gender, I can see that going both ways. But thank you. This is a great list of questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Alavey.
Tad naive as to how extensive your collaborations go, but interestingly, this is one of the issues of great importance to our Inland Empire Chamber of Commerce, and how to help our area educational field get more intense and robust CTE courses. And I wondered if you ever have thought of including chamber people like that. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Barnes.
Yes, I know how important this is as well, and thank you for your work, because as a school counselor, everyone's not college, everyone's not career. And I do agree with looking at the regionals, and I know we've been having discussions in our district about we have a lack of CTE teachers, but now with this new college career on the dashboard, you have to show that you have so many, your students are college and career ready. We know right now we're not going to meet the career ready because we don't have enough teachers, and we don't have enough for the students to hit that sequencing where it has to be 2 of the same strand. So you have to do 2 of the same to get that concentrator and completer. Well, that's a whole other discussion, but I'm a freshman who decided I wanted to do ag. Now I want to do computers. Well, no, I need you to stay in ag so you can qualify, so we can show that you're career ready, even though you don't want to do that. But we still don't have enough teachers anyway to, even if we could expand it. So we need more CTE, but at the same time, I'm concerned about if you don't, districts who don't have enough staff, we're going to show that we're not producing students who are career ready. We've got the college part, okay, but they're career ready, because I think it's kind of tough to tell a freshman, you pick this, you have to stay in it. But on top of that, we just don't have the teachers. So I'm hoping this will help that out. But we are very worried about how we're going to come out the next few years in our rural area as far as being career ready. And so we're not going to have the nice blue color or whatever on the dashboard.
Commissioner Grinnell-Shire.
Like my colleagues, I want to commend the work that is being proposed. I think it's very smart how the Commission in Wested is moving forward, so thank you. I also want to indicate that the CSU stands ready to help. I know a couple of my deans have already reached out to some of the staff members. Given our expertise and experience with linked learning, I think we have great capacity to address the need for preparing qualified teachers who can teach both the academic content as well as the technical content. So thank you for this work. I look forward to seeing what happens over the next couple of years.
Commissioner Martinez.
I should probably just say ditto to everything everyone else has said. I do really appreciate the questions, and I do really want to also encourage multiple stakeholders from the workforce sector and to really focus on these mid-skill jobs. And so I really loved the question that you guys presented in the previous document that you had us link to, which is about what are the specific fields in which the requirements need to be upgraded, and are there specific fields in which there is significant decrease in the applicants. And sometimes we have to really think deeply, and maybe because of the report we just did, are really about the workforce trends and the skills that are necessary, and hope that there's a real future forward look at the careers that are out there and the skills and the transferability of mindsets that we need with our students to really deal with this emerging workforce, and to really think really far forward, not 5 years from now, but 15 to 20 years. And that's why I really think the more that you can get from, I know like Wested has worked with the Institute for the Future before, but the more you can really think about the future workforce trends, I think it'd be really helpful to inform this and think on a really long basis.
Okay, thank you very much once again for your presentation. This is an information item. No action is needed. Thank you, Mr. Laux and Mr. Schuler. Having no additional items for today, I recess the Educator Preparation Committee.
And I will now recess the general session. Members of the commission will go into closed session. The general session will reconvene at 8:30 tomorrow morning.
All right.
4 items. Very meaty.
It was. We had some great conversations.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Take a break.
Well, you can.
Shall we reconvene at like
dark?
Is 15 minutes? Is that okay?
Why don't you make it 10?
Take a 10-minute break. I am so instructed. It'll be.
It will. That's right. Set expectations.
Head off. I have a meeting with Jennifer Peck and Aaron.
Oh, good.